Thank you very much, Nina, and a warm welcome from my side also for this session. To be honest, I was a bit afraid whether the tough competition of other events which take place now might leave us pretty much alone. I'm impressed and I'm very glad to see that this is not the case and that there is so much interest in our subject, digital identities for everyone. For us, and I think for everyone who is sitting here, to have a digital identity and to be able to prove it is nothing which we even think about. I tried to discuss this issue yesterday with my daughter, who is 17. She didn't understand the question, and she said, "What do you talk about? I mean, I have my identity, and if I need to prove it, I show my passport or my identity card. Everything is fine." And I think for us, it's very clear there can be no functioning relationship between the state on one hand and individuals on the other hand without clear proof of identification. It's so fundamental that we miss it only if we notice at a certain point we can't travel, we can't go to the doctor, we can't buy anything in the internet if we don't have it, but it's something we don't think about at all. And also for the state, I think this is clear, this is a vital issue that the state knows with whom to deal is, who gets social transfers, who gets access to certain transfers of the states, etc. Being careful with our data is the other side of the spectrum, a behavior which we are slowly and sometimes very painfully learning and with which we are not yet perfect. In developing countries, the situation is very different. I know an African country which has not registered any baby at all for the last 3 years. So babies being born and grow up without ever having had an official identity, an official registration, and later on also having no identity documents. And in areas of conflict, being identified as a member of a minority group, being identified as a member of a religion which is not the religion of the majority, may be extremely dangerous. Development cooperation has to take these issues in mind. It has to take in mind, on one hand, that, as I said, the state has to know whom to deal with, and it's also in the interest of each and every person that this person, that he or she can prove who she is. And I think the largest effort ever in this respect was done by the Indian government. They said, let's embark upon an effort that each and every person can be identified. And they had built a database of 1.2 billion people. And this database was hacked later on, and the data are for sale now in the internet. This is not how it has to happen, and I can very well understand that individuals say, if it is the danger, if there is a risk that my personal data will be later on sold in the internet, I rather don't get registered at all, perhaps without knowing, on the other hand, what other risks they encounter. What we are going to discuss today is whether new technologies may help in this trade-off, and whether blockchain may help. And I myself, I'm very much looking forward to have three very knowledgeable people on the panel to discuss this issue. I wish you an extremely interesting, a very exciting discussion. Good that you are here. Have a good day at the Republica and have a good session now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your introduction, Andreas Proksch. And now I want to welcome the three participants of the discussion, the panel. Over there is Marit Hansen. She's the Commissioner for Data Security in Schleswig-Holstein. In the middle, we have Andrew Tobin. He's Managing Director of Evernym and the founder of Sovereign Origin Network. And on my right side, it's Franz von Weizsäcker, Head of GIZ Blockchain Lab. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Marit, would you like to start with giving a bit of an introduction from the perspective, what do we want to protect here if we want to protect privacy?
Thank you very much, Franz. You heard already about a few risks related to central databases. Many states have central databases for their citizens, and there's a right to being registered to exercise the rights like voting, for example. But then there's the promise of the digital world that you don't need those centralized databases, for example, not provided by a state. The Google authentication, the Facebook profiles, they also are very much involved in authentication to, well, verification or proving your authentication of the identity. But those identity providers, they also come with a huge risk because they are also tracking and analyzing all your online usages on the internet. And this is another thing, if you don't trust the state, but you trust a central online identity provider, you may not be better off. From the privacy perspective, we strongly demand that you know what is known about yourself, the self-determination, that you can find out, that it's clear what to share, with whom, but also that there's no necessity, and therefore it should not be done, that each of your steps online is being monitored only in the sense of helping you with your verification of identity. And so the alternative approaches are quite interesting. There are some basic ones, like our German ID. We don't have one central database, and we have these ID cards. If I want to prove my age to buy alcohol, for example, I don't have to give out my birth date. Not when I was born exactly, not even the year of birth, because it's being calculated on a chip. So this is something where data minimization can work, but of course there's still a risk if the data is stored in a central database. And therefore we are looking forward to other solutions. Still, we have seen some very naive implementations, and they all switched the risks to other risks, I would say. So they were not really a good, or at least not a stable solution for the full world. But of course, blockchain comes with another promise. And I'm curious what Andrew has to say about it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marit. Yes, so some really interesting points that you brought up there. And I think what we've seen with the world of blockchain and identity is some initial first-generation solutions that don't actually solve the identity problem. Let's look at what that problem is. The problem is at the moment that the internet, when it was built, was not built with an identity layer. And what that means is that we can't prove who we are when we're online. It's very, very difficult. At the moment, if we're just in proximity with each other, I can take out a credential like this, and if I need to prove to Marit who I am, I can show her. There we go.
Fair enough.
And it looks a bit like me, right? So when you're with somebody, it's very easy. You can use credentials that the government or the driving license or whoever has issued you, and present them to the person you're with. When the internet goes in the middle, there is no standardized way of doing that. And that's the problem, and that's why we all have so many usernames, so many passwords, because the way technology has handled that problem has been for every service provider to create a database and give you access to that and give you an account. And some of those service providers become what I call connection brokers. And they might let you log in with Facebook or something like Google Authenticator. And they do that so they can profile you and correlate all your activities and see what you do to sell you advertising. So why can't a government give me a digitized version of this? Well, one of the reasons is there's no standard way of doing it. So they give you an ID card and there's a central database and so on. What distributed ledgers and blockchains bring along is a different way of doing things. And I should point out, firstly, a really important rule. Don't put this stuff on a ledger or blockchain. Do not do it. We get a lot of people saying, oh, well, I'm going to put my passport on the blockchain. That means nothing, and it gives a horrendous super cookie for anyone who wants to be able to see what you're doing. They can look at this thing that's on the ledger that can't ever be deleted that refers to you. So my company are the originators of an initiative called Sovrin, S-O-V-R-I-N, and many other companies around the world are participating in this now. And we don't own this thing. It's a not-for-profit, open source, distributed ledger just for identity. And it handles a lot of the really complex problems of identity that I'm sure Marit is going to bring up. Things like, how do you revoke a credential that you've been issued? How do you avoid being correlated when you're exchanging information? How do you track the information that you've sent to somebody so you can ask them to delete it if you need to? So this new world that we're coming into is one where there doesn't need to be a central database. It's very much a digitized version of these things that I can carry around. I carry them around. I decide when to show them, but I show them with some cryptographic superpowers that these things don't have, that make it a step above anything that we can do at the moment.
Well, thank you so much, Andy. That's very inspiring. How far is this new system developed? I mean, would that be usable and scalable to the degree that, for example, the Indian government is doing right now with 1 billion people being identified?
Yeah, great question about scalability. So the Sovrin network is live now. It has not yet gone general availability, so that's happening probably a bit later on this year. We're not in charge of it anymore. We're one of the node operators, but there are many other organizations who are running nodes, Deutsche Telekom included as a recent one, IBM is another one, banks, universities, NGOs as well. And one of the big criticisms of the blockchain is scalability, because people think of Bitcoin that has a long write time. With identity for all, you need to be able to handle billions or trillions of identifiers, okay, including for connected things. So I won't go into too much technical detail, but the way that the network is being designed, and again, it's an open source project, the way it's being designed is to allow massive scalability because you don't always need to refer to the ledger to do things.
If I need a different persona, how does it work, personas?
Right, great question. So a core part of the way Sovrin works is that every connection you have online is separate from every other connection. So I can have as many identifiers as I need. So every identifier, sorry, every connection, every relationship I have online is unique and secure and private. So if you imagine your phone book on your phone, your contact list, you have a different number for everyone that's on that list, right? But they all have the same number for you, which is the number your mobile operator gave you, that the mobile operator can take away, by the way. With Sovrin, things are a bit different, and they would all have a different number for you. Not a phone number, but a thing called a decentralized identifier. And that means that every connection you have is kept separate and unique. That means you can have as many personas as you want. I could share just the fact I can drive with you, and with Franz I could share my date of birth and my passport and other information. So it allows you to avoid correlation, keep all of your personas completely separate on secure channels.
Maybe, Marit, you could explain to us the challenges we have, or what is new now with the introduction of GDPR in relation to that, and what possible challenges are coming up. I mean, can we implement the right to be forgotten on the blockchain? Or
So usually the blockchain poses many questions for data protection people, especially because the deletion is by design not possible. Of course, there can be correction, that is a new set of data that comes afterwards and has a link to the original thing, but it's a good, very good thing for archiving, for integrity, but it's very difficult if you want to combine it with the data subject rights, meaning that you want perhaps deletion or correction immediately, and also the question of who is responsible. This is a totally different angle of perspective. Usually the all data protection law wants one data controller, or if there are multiple controllers who are in charge, then they all have the burden of being compliant with the law. So this is a little bit of an open issue. The first issue, I think, was tackled already by Andrew by saying not the content will be there. So it's not about deleting the content because there is no content, but there's a pointer. I understand it that way. And so, okay, you can correct me. And what about now the other pieces of data? And also the question of do we need already verified identities there? Who is doing the verification? Or can I be on that blockchain without state intervention and perhaps having multiple personas already without only using this persona system?
Yeah, absolutely. So GDPR is a great question, and it's to use an old phrase, sorts the men from the boys when it comes to blockchain knowledge. Firstly, if you don't put this stuff on a blockchain, then that's fine. If you do, or if you put a hash of it on a ledger, then you've got a problem, because all of the organizations or people running the nodes that all have a copy of the ledger then come under, I would imagine, data processor rules, if not data controller rules. So if you don't put this on the ledger in the first place, you're in a much better position. Secondly, as a person, I want to be able to have a record of everyone with whom I have shared data. And when I share that data, I share it one-to-one, privately and down a single channel. There's no middleman. There's no connection broker. So it's like I can show you Franz this, and when I show it to him, I have my own cryptographically verifiable record that I've shown it to him. And he has the same thing at his side, saying, Andrew showed you this on this day and this time. So once I have that list of things, it then becomes much easier for me to ask Franz to delete it. Now, there's no way you can suck data back. We all know that if you pass some digital data somewhere, you can't suck it back. But what you can do is you can record the fact you gave it, and then you can record the fact you're asking for it to be deleted. And the other side has the record that you gave it to them, and now a record that you've asked them to delete it. So if they don't delete it, then you can take them to court.
Data Protection Commissioners first, perhaps.
Exactly, and say, here's the proof. Okay, so it becomes much, much more powerful. And if you have the ability to do what we call selective disclosure, which is where you take just a couple of elements from a credential, I don't have to share the whole thing. If I need to prove I can drive, I can just prove I can drive. I don't need to share my place of birth and so on. Or you take it a step further and you have what are called zero knowledge proofs. And that's where you can say, I'm over 18, but I'm not going to give you my date of birth, or I'm a British citizen and I'm not going to give you any more information. A zero knowledge proof is really powerful, and until now they've been really complicated to do. That's why they're not generally available. With Sovereign, you get selective disclosure, zero knowledge proofs built into the protocol for free for everybody. So you get a lot of steps towards how you can handle GDPR questions. We have an in-house expert on data privacy who is writing a white paper which is going to come out at the European Identity Conference in Munich in a couple of weeks on this very subject.
I think we have to switch to the Q&A. I got already the first signs.
Yes, so we should be maybe taking questions from the audience. Is there anybody who would like to ask? Otherwise, I would have another question, but if there's anybody, please raise your hand. So far, I don't see any questions upcoming. I do have another question, because we at GIZ Blockchain Lab, we look into new technologies and new ways to interact with organizations and companies. So what is the typical setup? If you say Sovereign is an open platform, how would a company in healthcare, or how would maybe a humanitarian organization or an organization like GIZ or a partner country that we work in, how would they integrate in your solution?
Yeah, so it's no longer our solution, by the way. So there's some easy steps. So you can go online to Hyperledger Indy, which is under the Linux Foundation, which is where the source code is, and start working with it. There are getting started guides there and so on, and you can just get started. So that's happening actually. The state of British Columbia in Canada has a fantastic proof of concept project they've done for organizational identity, where an organization receives all of its licenses, proof that it is an organization, company's house registration, all as digital verifiable credentials, and the organization itself has an identity. And they've done that using all of the open source stuff. If you want to make it a bit easier, Evanim and some other companies have some tools that make it simpler, but it's all open source.
So there's a question from the audience.
If you think of the inputting a layer, identity layer into the internet, who should run this? Should that be lots of them, or should that be one, or how would you administer that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it comes down to what are called trust frameworks. So Sovereign is what's called a public permissioned network. In that not anybody can go in and set up a node. You have, if you want to run a node that makes the ledger work, you need to follow some rules, and those rules are described in a trust framework. And the trust framework, if you look at sovereign.org, you'll be able to see it. So organizations like Deutsche Telekom, IBM, Imperial College in London, Brigham Young University, and so on, who are stewards of the network, they agree to the rules. And when they sign up, there is a not-for-profit foundation called the Sovereign Foundation that administers those rules. So that's how it works. So there's no single entity that is in charge of the ledger itself.
One more question. From here, from there, there was one question.
The microphone.
Oh, sorry.
You said it is open source, if I understood you correctly. And my question is, have you implemented tools that I, as the user, can verify that the web page that I'm trying to connect with, that I can verify that they use your original source code, or if they have changed it anyhow?
Right, okay, that's a really interesting question, actually. How do you verify who you're talking to if it's an organization? So I don't want to get into too much technical detail here about how this works, but yes, it is open source. And rather than verifying a web page, you verify the organization behind it. So using what are called verifiable credentials, you can send a proof request to the organization saying, please prove who you are. And they can give you cryptographic proof back of the government department that says that they're an organization, or the tax authority, so the credentials that they have from third parties that I can trust. So rather than just trusting a certificate on a web page, you're going to a lot more detail. Oh, he's got a follow-up.
But I think it's also interesting for private or for non-government web page, or for commercial web page even, I think. What I'm asking myself is not only to verify the person I'm talking to or I'm connecting with, but maybe also to verify parts of the source codes he uses.
Okay, yeah, so I think we should probably take this offline afterwards, because we're getting into a little bit of technical detail. But it's a great example, actually.
One more?
I think, yeah, I think so, because time is very short and it's a highly relevant and complex topic. I'm sure the three speakers will be available for you afterwards.
Yeah. Okay. I would like to take these questions tomorrow into a workshop we're offering. Tomorrow 3 p.m. at Stage J. We will go into deeper detail and we will form groups so it will be much more interactive, and we will include a number of development practitioners and practitioners from humanitarian organizations. So you're much welcome to join tomorrow 3 p.m. Stage J. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Marit.